Hey, what's good, everybody? Welcome back to Cat 4 Questions. I think this is a good one. Got some really good questions coming in, a couple scenarios. The episode might be a little bit longer. Just dusted off the gravel bike, getting ready for Virtual Gravel Worlds August 29th. So there's a new-ish revamped gravel post with some touches from Oregon Trail that I did last year on the blog. Check that out. If you haven't subscribed yet to the channel, please do. It's like 75% of you that watch these haven't subscribed. Just click that button. Helps us out. And please like the video and share it. Let's jump right into this right now. So the first question is, we'll call it tapering. We'll actually call it how to hold on to a peak. This guy emailed. I actually met him at a race, Tonga, at the first one. Actually, no, at the second one when I was there before I left. And he said, hey man, at the first one, I was a little bit let down, but I knew my fitness was on the rise, so I just rolled with it. Over the month, things started to look and feel really good. I did he asked me not to use his name, so I'm not going to tell you what race he's in. And I actually felt really good all 3 days. I made a tactical mistake, but he did well in Sunday's race. And then, anyways, the advice I'm looking for is, how do I hold on to this peak? I'm planning to do Johnson City, but now I just found out the Georgia State Road Race is the next weekend, and it's one of my favorite races. So being able to perform optimally then is now my main goal. Unfortunately, this was just announced, so it's kind of an unplanned A race. I feel stuck trying to figure out what the best approach for trying to drag out a peak for 3 more weeks would be without overreaching. So I wanted to look through his stuff and see, what makes him think that he's on a peak, and how is he feeling this peak. And when you look back, he's doing about 8.5 to 10 hours of training. A lot of his training is he'll have like Mondays and Wednesdays off, and it's kind of like weekend loaded just by the nature of his job, I found out later. So there's a lot of times where his acute training load is going under his chronic training load. He's getting a little too rested. He is exactly like the person that we were talking about a couple episodes ago, where if you're always tapering, you're never really growing as a cyclist. Or I shouldn't say growing, you're never driving your fitness up as high as it possibly can go for like an A race. So I was like, I wonder how this looks. And he had a chunk after Tonga where he trained acute training load, stayed above chronic training load for a while. He was definitely starting to feel that fitness in Tonga. So I wouldn't necessarily call it a peak, but he's definitely just reaping the benefit of consistent training, feeling in his legs, and performing well. So now if you look on a calendar, he basically has a week to train, and then a week going into Johnson City, and then a week going into Georgia. So how do you do that? Well, let's think backwards, right? The A race is Georgia. So the week before that, you're doing all your training before. The week of the race, you're not doing anything. So I'm looking at the calendar here. We're on the 3rd. That race is on the 22nd. So that Friday, I always do openers the day before. Now, it's not mandatory. There were a few seasons where I stopped doing openers, where when I was in Rochester, New York, we would travel, 4 or 5 hours to some of the bigger races, and I would go with my teammates. So by the time you got all your crap in the car, you got to your teammate's house, you got their crap in the car, you drove to wherever this race was, it's now dinner time, you go to bed in the race the next day. I'm like, when am I going to do these openers? Like, screw it. And so you don't have, if it's going to make more stress on you, I would do the openers the day before you leave. I mean, it is what it is. But we'll talk about ideal scenarios. So races on the 22nd. We're going to do openers for an hour on Friday the 21st. We're going to rest on the 20th. You can do an active recovery ride. On the 19th, I do endurance and openers. It's a 2-hour endurance ride. If you normally ride an hour and a half, I'd ride an hour and a half. And just throw in 5 30-second efforts. The Tuesday before, though, you're riding hard, because you have Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday where you're just staying sharp. The dust, you're ready to go. But Tuesday, you need some stimulus in the legs. Now, you don't need to go and do a 4-hour death march. Do not do that. do a 2-hour training ride, go do a training crit, go do some VO2 max intervals, go do threshold. Whatever's going to give you some TSS, you want to do that. And then that Monday is the rest day after the weekend, which for this guy is Johnson City. Johnson City happens on the 14th and 15th. So you could do a similar thing the week before. My only thing would be is, maybe do a moderate workout on Wednesday so that your CTL stays up. You don't really need to taper into Johnson City and then the Georgia road race. Now, if you've just done a crazy amount of training, you could taper into both. Some people do have a 2-week taper. Shout out, like if you look at Fast Cat stuff, I used to get coached by Jason Hillenmeyer, who worked for Fast Cat. Frank has a blog. Frank Overton's the guy who runs the company. Really good dude. He has a 2-week taper on their website. It's great if you've been training a ton. If you're riding 8.5 to 10 hours, I personally would not do that taper. It's just a lot of rest. But he even has like the Saturday before an event, I think, you're doing like a half sim of an event. Like if it's a 4-hour road race, you're doing a 2-hour hard road race. So they definitely agree with the fact like you need some stimulus in the legs. I just wouldn't taper twice. So I would say, again, Tuesday, do a hard workout. Wednesday can be moderate. What's moderate? Tempo, low threshold. VO2 max, just not a ton of time at it. Do 10 minutes of it. And then you have Thursday, Friday to recover. You're going into Johnson City. It's not your A race. That's going to be a really hard race because there's 3 stages. And then you go into the taper. What do you do before Johnson City? So that next week of training, or this week of training, I guess, 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th, I would say you're finishing out whatever block you've been working on. So if you've been working FTP stuff, don't switch to neuromuscular efforts. If you've been working neuromuscular stuff because you're like, hey, there's a sprint at Johnson City, it finishes on a whatever, and I need to be able to do 45-second repeats over and over, finish that block and then start, moving into the Johnson City race. So really that's the plan. And I guess understanding, it might not always be peaking. You might just be feeling the effects of consistent training, which is kind of what a peak is at times. The term peaking, I think, is used when people are like, I'm peaking, but it's like, dude, this is what happens when you train. Like, yeah, there's, man, it's a whole other discussion that maybe this is another episode, because then when people are like, I'm not peaking anymore, it's like, well, what happened, right? You probably just plateaued. So, but people say, oh, I'm falling off a peak, and people will use this terminology of I'm not peaking anymore, like the positive is gone, when really you're just encountering a negative. You're plateauing. Switch up the stimulus, figure out a different way to do it. I've kind of this past week, I was going in and Tonga 2 had been one of my goals and was ready to rip. And then without all the racing that happened for me when I left, and then bunch of driving, a couple really hot days here, the training wasn't great, and I sort of like stagnated a little bit. And it's just time to change up the stimulus for me. I'm going back to some FTP stuff. So anywho, this dude's gonna crush. I've tried to convince him to upgrade. His watts are Cat 2 watts per kilogram for a ton of durations, has some Cat 1 watts. So he's got half of the equation figured out. The other half, racing, is next for him. So, all right, question 2. That was a really good one. Thanks for sending it in. When racing, I look down at the numbers as far as power and heart rate. I'm about to go off, just warning. And it looks discouraging. I seem to be stronger mentally than physically and go into a grit grind mindset in the last 3 laps of a crit, even when I'm in a lot of pain. What's your take on that? Is feel the way to go, or a little bit of both? Can it just be a distraction? So let's first address the heart rate. A heart rate monitor is this little dinky, look at a heart rate monitor and then compare it to how much worth cyclists give it. Like, I never get furious with people because it doesn't accomplish anything. But when I had a teammate 7 years ago say, man, I was in the break, but my heart rate was skyrocketing. I knew if I kept going, I'd blow up. I wanted to freaking scream. Like, he backed off the gas because he looked at his heart rate monitor and was like, I'm going to blow up. Dude, it's a bike race. Like, you go with the guys. The race is dictated by the people you're with. My mind was like exploding. Like, I couldn't understand, I couldn't comprehend what was going on. Like, you pulled back because you were about to explode? Like, what if you drank an extra cup of coffee? What if this piece of crap device that we all wear was reading wrong, which happens all of the time? Or like the other effect, people are like, yeah, I just couldn't get going today. I couldn't get my heart rate up for these intervals. Great. Who wants a high heart rate? Like, if I'm going out and banging really hard efforts and my heart rate's low, I'm like, this is awesome. People will say that. I'll say, well, how did your legs feel? All the legs felt fine, but I just couldn't get my heart rate up. I don't understand that. Why would you want to have that feeling of your heart blasting through your chest and like coming out your throat? Ignore heart rate. Use heart rate when you are trying to understand decoupling on an aerobic ride. Understanding, you know, hey, I started at 150 BPM for this threshold interval and I finished at 175. Okay, you're the guy that or woman that might want to go do some more sweet spot. You probably don't have as much aerobic development right now. This might be a little bit too hard for what you're trying to train, but that's, again, a whole other can of worms. Don't look at heart rate in a race. Should you look at power? In a crit, I hit start and I'm never looking at the power meter or the power, or, I mean, a crit is you're gassing it and going really hard. I don't understand how seeing any of those numbers will ever help you be faster in the race. You're only recording that ride to look back and have data for later analysis. Now, in a road race, I kind of tend to agree with that same thought. Like, what are you going to do if you're getting in the break and you're riding with stronger dudes and they're too hard? Why would you pull out of the break because you might blow up, as opposed to try to stay as long as possible? And if you blow up and go out the back, it's the same as pulling back, right? So like, same thing happened. One was you just wussed out. The other one was you blew up, which is going to make you stronger, because if you blow up in a bike race, you went as deep as you possibly could. And you went deeper than you'll probably ever be able to make yourself go in training. Also, always remember, it eventually gets easier. Land Run 3 years ago, maybe 2 years ago, got in a break with Tim Mitchell and Kevin Gherkins. Kevin Gherkins is a phenomenal cyclist. So is Tim, but Kevin Gherkins is, you know, former pro road racer. Dude shreds the gravel, insanely nice human being. He was pulling so freaking hard, probably about, I don't know, it felt like 20 minutes of the three of us trying to stay away initially and like establish a break. I'm like, dude, this guy, I hope he like gets a little bit tired, because I don't know how long I can do this for. Unfortunately, Kevin flatted, and Tim rolled up to me. He's like, dude, I don't know how long I could do that for. I laughed because I'm thinking the same exact thing. Eventually it slows down. So don't look at the heart rate. Don't look at the power. Race the race. You know, it's now if you're same thing. If you're like pacing yourself up a climb, if you're pacing yourself, you're not racing. You're pacing yourself at your own pace. If you are solo off the front, I guess you could use pacing, but then you're using numbers that, like, if you're in a race and you're 1,500 kJs in or you're 2,000 kJs in and you don't do intervals kJs deep, this is skewed. What number are you going to use? Like, don't use your max number, because you're not going to be able to max out. So now the power meter is going to hurt you, because you're going to go off your max number that you can do when you're fresh. When you go out and you warm up for 20 minutes and you crush, you're not that rider right now, most likely. So go by feel. You know, you can tell when you're going hard enough, and you can tell when you're going too easy and you're going to get caught. And it's that, I mean, that fear of getting caught should drive you to go harder. I wouldn't really be staring at the power meter. The only time I would maybe look is to make you go harder. Like, I don't feel like I'm going very fast, and you look down, and if you know you can normally go with 300 watts and you're doing 270, ask yourself, hey, can I push a little bit harder? But in a crit, no. Okay, number 3, dinner before a bike race. Dinner before a bike race and food. Okay, yeah. So we're gonna go with dinner before a bike race. I'm really gonna say that it really starts the day before the bike race, starting with your breakfast, lunch, and dinner. I'm leaning my diet towards carbs. I'm a fan of carb loading. I would say to highlight for dinner though, definitely vegetables, because you got to remember that like whatever you're taking in, you got to get out in the morning before the bike race. Vegetables help that. A salad helps that. Don't put creamy dressing on everything, like, you know, raw veggies, steamed veggies, grilled veggies, whatever. And then, you know, things like Patrick had just posted, food is fuel. And he talks about, you know, complex carbs. And while I like sweet potatoes or regular potatoes, I try and say like, okay, veggies, and then what's like high in carbs? And usually my choice is rice or pasta. Both are technically a processed food. They work for me. If you want to be more like, you could get like, you know, quinoa, or, you know, whole foods are good. If you're stuck in the middle of nowhere, do you know what's pretty good? Ruby Tuesdays. They've got a salad bar where you can get a ton of veggies, fresh veggies, and then get like a chicken breast or some pasta. But if you get pasta, as we talked about in another video, if you go to like Olive Garden, the only thing that is not laden in fat at that restaurant is spaghetti and meatball, I think. And I would only eat like 1, maybe 2 meatballs. But yeah, whole foods, carb-based, and just, you know, just don't eat junk. It's not going to help you out. And I made a comment about cereal. I used to eat cereal a lot, and I used to carb with it a lot. And I think that was definitely a mistake. I sometimes feel like my legs get like blocked up from that type of sugar. I have no proof. This is all anecdotal, but it's just like when you look at cereal, like, this is like garbage. So I try and stay away from that. And now, question number 4. With 99% of racing being canceled here in Iowa, what do you recommend riders do? I recommend Gravel World's virtual race on August 29th. Plug. Should we continue with our training plans? Oh, and actually you can do it anytime during the month of August. I'm just doing mine on August 29th, and they asked me to do an Instagram takeover. It's going to be awesome. Should we continue with our training plans to see how our fitness develops? Should we use Zwift races to test it? Should we go back to mid-range intervals, 8 to 25 minutes? Should I start back with weights? Great questions. So we'll go backwards. Start back with weights. I think you should be lifting all year round. So yes, you should start back with weights. I'm trying to get more, since it's been so hot here in Tennessee, you know, no matter when I leave, if I leave at 5:30 in the morning or in the afternoon, you're getting like 3 quality hours. Then it gets really hot, and I'm just like, you know, I'm not putting out good power. I think I'm going to start cutting some rides a little shorter, even though I've been enjoying doing mega miles this season, and doing an extra heavy day during the week. I really love lifting. It helps my body composition the most, and the strength aspect, obviously, but I find it easier to stay fit when I'm lifting. So I'm going to try and do that more. We won't actually go backwards. What do I recommend? I do recommend follow through with your training plan and see how far you can get with it. Like what works, what doesn't work. When do you start to plateau? If you're doing FTP stuff, go and do a block of VO2 max. How do you respond to that? I surprisingly this year, I've done a ton of VO2 max work and a ton of like fartlek intervals that when I've started to get tired, I just let the road kind of dictate. And if I'm going for like a real like flog, like a race sim, I go hard when my body doesn't want to go hard. I've been amazed at the gains I've made in that, of just my repeatability of really hard efforts, which is huge for gravel racing. It's just been a really good year to experiment. I have a ton of data now of like riding at I rode a 180 CTL for a long time this season, just because I was putting in a massive amount of hours. I never would have thought I could have held on to that. And I really wasn't. If I was like cracked, I'd be like, okay, I'll crack and take 2 weeks off and just go lift. It never happened. Once the heat came, it made it harder, and I think harder to maintain the hours that were actually quality. Like I just don't see the point. I think heat adaptation is a great thing to do and go out and ride in the heat, but I got to a point where I was like death marching home, and I'm like, this is, you know, probably not a great idea. So I think it's fine to do a 4-hour ride instead of the 5.5-hour ride where you die. So yeah, continue with that. Now, do you use Zwift races to test it? You can. The only thing with the Zwift race is it's a really hard 45 to 60 minutes. That's FTP and VO2 max based only. So like, I would say if you're trying to test what you did, test it off your own numbers. If you want to use Zwift as a hard third intensity day, or if you want to use Zwift as something to have a fun goal, for sure, get on there, crush it. Use Zwift to do intervals inside if you want cooler temps. I would just prefer to get up earlier and still deal with some heat, because I feel like that strain on the system is still going to be really good, even if my watts are a little bit lower than, let's say, April, when the temps are in the 70s and you're just crushing. So, and then maybe now the term is not a moot point. Should we go back to mid-range intervals, 8 to 25 minutes, only if that was something that you had been working on, or if you see that as a place where you can improve on, or if it's a weakness. Like, ask yourself, why would I do this? Why am I doing this? If you don't know why you're doing a session, if you're a coached athlete, that's part of having a coach. You don't always have to, you should understand why you're doing things. But I guess when you know what the block goal is, you don't have to know every single workout. I think it would be very helpful for you to do that. You could ask your coach, like, why am I doing this again? But if you don't have a coach, every time you get on the bike, you should just ask yourself, what am I trying to accomplish today? Where am I taking this ship? Where is it going? What are we doing? Because if you're doing if it's always really sporadic, like I think hybrid months are good sometimes, like do one VO2 max and one FTP. It's a good way to keep intensity up, but really focus on FTP or VO2 max. But if every ride all the time is always like very sporadic, you're really missing out. All you're doing is driving up training stress, which will make you somewhat faster the more you ride with a reasonable amount, the faster you get, but a focused effort will make you way faster. So, yeah, I'd kind of just said, continue to work on the weaknesses or any training that you find mentally tough or fatiguing, because then with no racing looming, you can really try and tax yourself and then get proper recovery. And that was basically my response. So, Brendan at EVOQ.BIKE. Please share this with one friend. Please like the video. Man, we have so many tasks for you guys. Please subscribe to the channel. Please check out the blog. Let us know how we can help you. We're here to help. If you have a question and it's a detailed one, it might take a few days to get back to you, but it's because we really want to understand the issue and provide you with a non-cookie cutter response. So thanks for everything, guys and girls. Appreciate you guys, and I hope you have a great day. See ya.